In 2010, a team of geneticists in Leipzig, Germany, sequenced DNA from a tiny fragment of bone, a piece no bigger than a coin, pulled from the floor of a remote Siberian cave. They expected it to belong to a Neanderthal or maybe an early modern human. Instead, it belonged to neither. The DNA was something entirely new, something no one had ever seen before. That single bone fragment revealed an entire species of ancient humans that had lived alongside us and Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. And somehow, until that moment, we had no idea they ever existed. This is what happens when the ground gives up its secrets. One discovery, one accidental find, and everything we thought we knew about our past gets rewritten overnight. These are 5 ancient discoveries that did exactly that. The cave sits high in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, near the border of Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan. Locals had known about it for generations. They called it Denisova Cave, named after a hermit who supposedly lived there in the 18th century. Archaeologists had been digging there on and off since the 1970s, mostly finding stone tools and animal bones. Interesting, but nothing earth-shattering. Then in 2008, a Russian archaeologist named Alexander Sebenkov found something small in the cave's eastern gallery, a fragment of a finger bone barely worth a second glance. It looked like it came from a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The team sent it to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, where Svante Pääbo's group had been pioneering ancient DNA extraction. What came back changed everything. The DNA didn't match Homo sapiens. It didn't match Neanderthals either. It sat on its own branch of the human family tree, diverging from our lineage roughly 800,000 years ago. This child belonged to a population of humans that science had never identified before. They were named Denisovans after the cave. But here's the strange part. When researchers started looking at the DNA of modern humans across Asia and Oceania, they found traces of Denisovan genes everywhere. People in Papua New Guinea carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetans inherited a gene from Denisovans called EPAS1 that helps them survive at high altitude. These ghost humans had been hiding in our own genetic code the entire time. An entire species revealed by a bone chip the size of a sunflower seed. And they weren't the only ancient humans hiding in plain sight. In 2003, a joint Australian-Indonesian team was excavating Liang Bua, a limestone cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia. They were looking for evidence of early modern human migration through Southeast Asia. What they found instead was something no one was prepared for. About 6 meters below the cave floor, they uncovered a nearly complete skeleton of an adult female. She stood roughly 106 centimeters tall, about 3.5 feet. Her brain was roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, around 380 cubic centimeters, but the tools found alongside her were sophisticated. There were stone blades, evidence of fire use, and the butchered remains of Stegodon, a small elephant-like creature that once roamed Flores. The team, led by Mike Morwood and Peter Brown, announced the discovery in October 2004. They classified her as a new species, Homo florescensis. The press immediately dubbed her the Hobbit. The scientific world erupted. Some researchers refused to accept that a human species with such a small brain could produce complex tools. They argued she was simply a modern human with a pathological condition, maybe microcephaly or some form of dwarfism. The debate raged for years, but then more remains turned up, more individuals spanning tens of thousands of years, all showing the same proportions. This wasn't a sick individual, this was a population. A separate species of tiny humans that had lived on Flores from at least 100,000 years ago until as recently as 50,000 years ago, possibly even more recently. The implications were staggering. At the same time that our ancestors were spreading across the globe, another species of human, one standing barely above your waist, was hunting miniature elephants on a tropical island. And we had absolutely no idea until a team dug a hole in the right spot. If Denisovans and Homo floresiensis forced us to rethink who shared our planet, the next discovery forced us to rethink when civilization itself began. For most of the 20th century, the story of human civilization went like this. First came agriculture around 10,000 BCE. Farming produced surplus food, which allowed people to settle in one place. Settlements grew into villages, villages into towns, and eventually, once societies were large and complex enough, people started building monuments and temples. Religion, architecture, organized labor, all of it came after agriculture. That was the accepted sequence. Farming first, then everything else. Then a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. The site was called Göbekli Tepe, which translates roughly to Potbelly Hill. Local farmers had known about the stones sticking out of the ground for decades. An American survey team had briefly examined the spot in the 1960s and dismissed it as a medieval cemetery. Schmidt saw something different. Starting in 1995, Schmidt's team began excavating. What they uncovered was extraordinary. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons. The pillars were arranged in circles and many were carved with intricate reliefs of animals. Foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, snakes, wild boar. Some pillars had arms carved along their sides and hands folded across their fronts as if they were stylized human figures. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest structures at around 9,500 BCE, some possibly even earlier. That made Göbekli Tepe roughly 7,000 years older than Stonehenge and 6,000 years older than the earliest known cities in Mesopotamia. But here's what made it truly shocking. There was no evidence of permanent settlement nearby. No houses, no granaries, no signs of agriculture. The people who built Göbekli Tepe appeared to be hunter-gatherers. The entire model was backwards. These people hadn't settled down and then built a temple. They built a monumental complex first, possibly as a gathering place for scattered groups across the region. Some researchers now believe that the need to feed the labor force required to construct Göbekli Tepe may have actually driven the invention of agriculture in the area. The desire to build something sacred came before farming, not after it. One hilltop in Turkey flipped the foundational narrative of civilization on its head, and Klaus Schmidt, who championed the site until his death in 2014, spent years saying the same thing. First came the temple, then the city. If Göbekli Tepe redefined when organized human effort began, the next discovery redefined when human creativity began. On December 18, 1994, 3 French spelunkers were exploring cliffs above the Ardèche River in southern France. Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire were following a faint draft of air coming from a gap in the rock, a sign that a larger space might lie beyond. They squeezed through a narrow passage, climbed down into a vast underground chamber, and switched on their headlamps. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. Across the cave walls, hundreds of paintings spread out before them, horses in mid-gallop, lions hunting in packs, rhinoceroses charging, a panel of 4 horse heads rendered with shading and perspective that wouldn't look out of place in a Renaissance workshop. The artists had used the natural contours of the rock to give the animals 3-dimensional form. Some figures appeared to be in motion, drawn with multiple legs like frames in an animation. Before Chauvet, the oldest known cave art was in Lascaux, also in France, dated to roughly 17,000 years ago. Scholars had assumed a gradual progression, simple marks and handprints first, then crude outlines, and finally the sophisticated animal paintings of Lascaux. Art, like everything else, was supposed to have evolved slowly over thousands of years. Radiocarbon dating of the Chauvet paintings returned ages of roughly 32,000 to 36,000 years. Some estimates pushed even older. These weren't primitive scratchings, they were masterworks, created by people with a sophisticated understanding of anatomy, movement, light, and shadow. And they predated Lascaux by nearly 20,000 years. The idea that artistic skill developed gradually and linearly collapsed. The Chauvet artists were working at a level that wouldn't be matched again for tens of thousands of years. Something had been present in the human mind from very early on, a capacity for abstract thought, symbolic expression, and aesthetic mastery that we had dramatically underestimated. The cave was sealed by a rockfall thousands of years ago, which is why it survived in such remarkable condition. It was never a residence. People came here specifically to create these images, likely by firelight, deep underground, in spaces where the sounds of their voices would have echoed off the stone. Whatever Chauvet was, it wasn't decoration, it was something far deeper, and we're still trying to understand exactly what. There's one more discovery on this list, and it might be the most confounding of all, because it didn't rewrite when something happened, it rewrote what we thought was possible. In 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were working off the coast of the tiny island of Antikythera, between Crete and the mainland. One of them surfaced raving about seeing bodies on the seafloor. What he'd actually found was a Roman-era shipwreck, dating to roughly the 1st century BCE. The wreck yielded beautiful bronze statues, glass, coins, and pottery, but among the artifacts was something that didn't seem to belong. A corroded lump of bronze and wood about the size of a shoebox fused together by 2,000 years of seawater. It sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for decades, mostly ignored while scholars focused on the statues. Then in 1959, a British science historian named Derek de Solla Price took a closer look. Using X-ray imaging, he discovered that the lump contained a complex system of interlocking gears, at least 30 of them, with teeth cut to precise specifications. This wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a machine. Further analysis over the following decades revealed something astonishing. The Antikythera mechanism was an analog computer built to predict astronomical positions, lunar and solar eclipses, and possibly even the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. By turning a hand crank, the user could model the movements of the sun, moon, and likely 5 known planets across the sky. Nothing even remotely comparable would appear in the historical record for another 1,000 years. The level of miniaturized gearwork in the mechanism wouldn't be matched until medieval European clockmakers began building astronomical clocks in the 14th century. The implications were unsettling. If the ancient Greeks could build something this sophisticated, what else might have existed that simply didn't survive? How many other devices, techniques, and ideas vanished when libraries burned, ships sank, and civilizations collapsed? The Antikythera mechanism survived by pure accident. A ship that happened to sink in water shallow enough for sponge divers to reach. If that ship had gone down in deeper water, we might never have known this technology was possible in the ancient world. And that's the thread that connects all 5 of these discoveries. They weren't the result of grand expeditions or decades-long research programs. A bone chip in a Siberian cave, a skeleton 6 meters underground on a tropical island, carved pillars on a Turkish hilltop that farmers had been plowing around for generations, a cave sealed by a rockfall and opened by 3 people following a breeze, a corroded lump pulled from a shipwreck and ignored in a museum for half a century. Each one sat there, waiting, and when someone finally looked closely enough, centuries of assumptions fell apart. That's what makes this field so fascinating. The next rewrite might already be sitting in a museum drawer, or buried under a farmer's field, or sealed behind a rock face in a cave nobody has entered in 30,000 years. We just haven't found it yet. If you want to go deeper into any of these stories, I've covered several of them in full-length episodes on this channel. And if you're the kind of person who finds this stuff as fascinating as I do, subscribe. There's a lot more coming.